if I were smart, I would have taken one of my anxieties and assigned it a book. But I am both lazy and greedy, and I was like, what if they all formed an anxiety Voltron and made Wanderers? And so, I really liken the writing of horror and apocalyptic work like this as sort of like the sorcerers of old, where you're drawing, the chalk summoning circle on the ground, and you're summoning the demons into that space. So you can grapple with them. It's like a place for me to wrestle with my anxieties. That's not directly wrestling with the anxieties. Like I don't have to experience them. I just am doing it by proxy, and it feels like a way to deal with it in a sense.
What is up, everybody, and welcome to episode 44 of SFF Addicts. I'm your host, Adrian M. Gibson, and welcome to your weekly dive into the world of science fiction, fantasy, and writing craft. Joining me, as always, is my co-host, the Chewie to my Han Solo, the Joker to my Commander Shepard, my dear MJ Kuhn. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Doing great. And a quick note for everyone out there, the official SFF Addicts Patreon and merch store are now live, so check the links in the description below to support what we do. You can get some exclusive bonus episodes on the Patreon, or you can buy some merch like the one that MJ is wearing right now for anyone who's watching in video. And don't forget to rate and review the podcast on your favorite podcast app, and subscribe to the FanFiAddict YouTube channel, where this and every other episode is available in full video. And now, joining us once again, science fiction and horror's greatest beard, because Kevin Hearn has taken the helm of fantasy. Chuck Wendig.
That's true. He's got fantasy. Yeah.
How's it going, Chuck?
Good. How are you?
I'm doing very well. And today we'll be delving into a mini-masterclass on post-apocalyptic fiction, which I'm very, very excited to talk about. But Chuck, just to kick things off, what do you think attracts people to apocalyptic narratives?
Oh, I don't know what attracts people to it, but I can tell you what attracts me to them. I find that they're weirdly cathartic. Mm-hmm. So when I was a kid, the first horror novel I think I really read was Swan Song by Robert McCammon, which, for those who don't know, is like a 980-some page post-apocalyptic nuclear winter supernatural devil across the wasteland nightmare book. It's amazing. It's one of my favorite books. And it was, based very explicitly on one of the anxieties I had as a kid, because those who are of my age were told, like, hey, we might get vaporized in the middle of the night. Good night, sweet dreams. Don't worry about bed bugs because Russia has nukes. You're just like, oh no, that's not good. So it was a very anxiety making thing. And so reading a book like that, which tackles it head on, I think should have, maybe, at least by like sort of logical thinking, should have upset me a lot. And it was scary. But afterward, like, I kind of felt better. And I don't know if it's like I felt better because it just helped me kind of work things out, or if it helped. I was like, well, even if it happens, it's not going to be this bad. Like, I'm not going to be swept across the wasteland by what might be the literal devil. So it's going to be fine. And, with Wanderers, people I thought the pandemic happened and then Wanderers would like just hit a shelf and no one would ever read it again. And that was not the case. It not only maintained its sales, but it sometimes bumped during the pandemic. And, a certain type of reader, I think, finds a weird level of comfort in that sort of thing. So that, I think, to me, is the trick.
Yeah. It's like the catharsis of being like, this is what could happen to me.
Yeah.
And so it's like, people survive. I could
they survive, and they're still characters, and they're still people. And
Yeah, I love that, though, because I was actually having a similar conversation with a friend the other day about, like, when I'm sad, listening to sad music doesn't make me sadder. It's almost like it releases a pressure valve.
Yeah,
and
right.
Like, it is sad for me, so I don't have to be as sad, right? So maybe it's like kind of a similar phenomenon that's happening here. I love that.
Yeah, and it makes you feel like someone else understands what you're thinking, whether you're sad or whether you're scared or whatever it is. Someone else has put that to words/music/art/ whatever it is.
Right. It's like a weird kindred spirit feeling.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're talking a lot about therapy
Yeah.
with Chuck. So
Yeah,
I know,
right?
exactly. Books are therapy with reading and writing. It's true.
I love it. So specifically with books, because there's a lot of apocalypse like fiction out there in general. Like there's films and there's video games and gosh, all of it. Do you feel like there's a specific benefit or like an advantage that books have in bringing unique perspectives that maybe different mediums don't explore or aren't able to explore?
Books, I mean, always bring to the table the ability to have a little bit of nuance, right, to the conversation, and that sort of granularity of interior thought that you don't get with films and TV for sure.
Yeah.
You get a little bit with comics because comics has narration, but really books are, I mean, they're leggy in how the story moves, and that's one of their values. I mean, I know there's some people who have conversations about like, well, what is necessary in storytelling, but with books, like, you know, you can get away with a lot of things as long as it works. So, you know, in writing Wanderers for me, there was this kind of experience where, you know, if I were smart, I would have taken one of my anxieties and assigned it a book. But I am both lazy and greedy, and I was like, what if they all formed an anxiety Voltron and made Wanderers? And so, you know, I really liken the writing of horror and apocalyptic work like this as sort of like the sorcerers of old, where you're drawing, you know, the chalk summoning circle on the ground, and you're summoning the demons into that space. So you can grapple with them. It's like a place for me to wrestle with my anxieties. That's not directly wrestling with the anxieties. Like I don't have to experience them. I just am doing it by proxy, and it feels like a way to deal with it in a sense.
And that's why the book is so chunky.
That's why the book is so chunky. I have a lot of anxieties.
Just a lot of shit to deal with.
A lot of shit to work out. Yeah.
And you mentioned Swan Song, but are there other stories or games or books or movies or TV shows or anything like that within the apocalypse, post-apocalyptic genre that are personal favorites of yours?
You know, The Stand, obviously, Last of Us. I mean, these are sort of obvious ones. You know, I always like something weird like Adventure Time because like it's clearly set after an apocalypse, but you're not quite clear on what or why. And that's interesting to me. I'm reading a book right now called The Last by Hannah Jameson, which is about a guy who's a historian, and he's in a Swiss hotel in the Alps for a conference, and nuclear war breaks out across the globe, and they're cut off. And like most of the people leave the hotel, but some stay behind. And there's also a murder, and he's like kind of trying to like spend his time in the end of the world solving this murder. And it's grim, but not hopeless. It's just a weird. It's not really horror. It's definitely kind of a literary / murder mystery kind of vibe. But it still has that post-apocalyptic weirdness to it. That's like how everything sort of doesn't feel quite right, but then how some people cleave to normalcy. And it's fascinating. It's a great book.
That sounds fascinating.
That sounds cool. That sounds kind of like I read this book by the Strugatsky brothers, who are the ones who wrote Roadside Picnic.
Right. Okay.
And it's called Dead Mountaineers Hotel. And it has like a very similar vibe to that, where there's like this very kind of atmospheric vibe of people up in like a mountain hotel and a murder mystery that's going on.
Okay.
Instead of
it's like a subgenre all its own. We didn't even know.
I want to write one.
Like my turn.
Why aren't you writing one, man?
Damn it.
I love it. So we kind of touched on this a little bit in part one, but people have said that Wanderers was like prophetic, you know, have asked you what your crystal ball is. I
get emails.
So do you have your own black swan? No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, I just use all the chat GPT stuff. I had early access, and I was just like, hey, how's the war going to end? And he's like, let me tell you.
This is what's going to happen. It's coming for you.
Let me outline this for you. I got you.
Right?
It's going to be fungus.
Oh my God. It's going to be fungus. Watch out. Yeah. But like in all seriousness, what was it? Because obviously you wrote it. It came out before the pandemic. You must have written it several years before the pandemic. What made you want to write an apocalypse novel? Like, do you remember the impetus for the idea?
Yeah, it was just like again, that had a whole I have a lot of anxieties, and the apocalypse is a really good framing for that idea. It's like how to get the band together. Like, well, an apocalypse will do it.
Yeah.
Apocalypse will bring all of the things I'm afraid of together in one cauldron that's bubbling over. So
yeah.
That was really sort of the thinking behind it. Is it seemed like a good framework for that. And pandemics were themselves one of my anxieties. Like, they show up like every, people say like, well, you're prophetic or whatever. But I mean, realistically, a pandemic happens every 10 years or so. We just don't think of them in the way that we think of COVID, because COVID was really bad.
Yeah.
It's really bad. And it also happened on a lot of bad watches, so to speak, in terms of politics and who was paying attention.
Exactly. Yeah.
And so it was allowed to get legs and run pretty fast. So, but they happened, like, swine flu, all the way back to Spanish flu, SARS, the plague, and Wanderers tries to cover some of that stuff, that like, hey, these things grab hold every once in a while. And, fungus, has been one of those things where I'm like, if fungus ever takes hold, we don't have a lot of great ways to deal with it, and that's gonna work out in this book. That's gonna be a thing that I'm going that way with it. So that's sort of where Wanderers went. But the prophetic thing was interesting because people again ask like, well, this, it talks about Ukraine, it talks about obviously the fungal side of things, the climate change side of things, pandemic, politics, and all of that was bats. And I was like, all of that is stuff that was easily seen. But the one thing that still freaks me out is that there was after COVID hit, there was news that there was an algorithm called Blue Dot that had predicted it a week before it happened.
Oh, shit.
And I was like, Blue Dot? Because it's called Black Swan in the book. And I was like, it's two colors.
But Blue Dot's a
each
shit.
color is a BL fronted word. I was like, no. I mean, that was like, I did this. This is my fault. Very sorry.
Did I just birth this into the world?
Yeah. So Adrian hallucinated me.
You
and
hallucinated
then I made
Blue Dot.
It's all Adrian's fault. I love it.
All Adrian's fault. You were trying to get at it.
So this is getting really meta. So like my hallucination hallucinated a pandemic.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Okay.
Yep.
Cool.
Yep. And now it's real.
Now it's real. So sorry.
You're welcome, everyone.
Yeah, mushrooms are magic.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's crazy because you actually bring it up in the book, but it's like this whole thing about like antibiotics and antifungals and things like that.
Yeah.
But it's like, I live here in Ecuador, and in the Amazon here in Ecuador, a lot of pharmaceutical companies come to the Amazon to look for certain bacteria or certain plants or trees or that kind of thing to basically synthesize and extract for a potential antibiotic or a potential antifungal. But it's like, even though the fight for antibiotics is dreadful, the fight for antifungals is even more dreadful. So
even more.
Oh, fuck.
Yeah. And there's no money in it, so they don't really pursue it as well as they should. Yeah.
Yeah. And you mentioned how this genre is good for you to kind of let out your anxieties and everything like that. But you brought up earlier about growing up, the weight of the Cold War and the potentiality of nuclear apocalypse and Russia and the United States kind of just like dumping some bombs on each other and everything going haywire. But, I find apocalypses tend to be a really good avenue for building upon societal fears. In terms of, grand dangers, but then kind of boiling it down into more individual perceptions of that danger. And that's something that your books do really well on multiple fronts. But it's like you mentioned, like the politics of the book. You mentioned Black Swan, which is an AI. So it's like we got a lot of really big concepts to deal with. But first we'll talk about the political, cultural climate in America while you were writing the book. And how that inspired the dynamics we see in Wanderers and Wayward. And because you were obviously writing it in the aftermath of Donald Trump. And
I was planning it in the rise to Trump. Like that's when I was like starting to really write the book in prior to his election, because it was still pretty clear that like this was bad. Even if he lost, it was it's like, this isn't good.
Hillary Clinton
all
sucks
of this
too.
is uncorked. So and then he got elected, and I was like, oh, okay. Well, here we are.
Here we are. Yeah.
Here we are. Yeah.
But for you, how was it to kind of like perceive all of that in real time and then translate it into something that was functional for Wanderers and Wayward?
I don't know. I just one of those things where I knew like I said, I didn't, unlike pretty much all of my other books prior to that, I didn't outline it. So it's one of those things where I was sort of following my gut chapter to chapter. And I was, I write front to back, start to finish, in part because I'm not smart enough to do differently. I would be like, what is happening now? I don't know. I've lost all of the thread.
MJ and I are the same. It's like,
I also have to do it that way. Yeah.
I have to do it that way. I would totally lose it. But one of the advantages of doing it that way is it allows me to experience the rhythm that the reader will also experience. So I can set the tempo and be like, you know what? This is dire. We need something funny, or this, we need to speed it up a little bit here, slow it down a little bit. So I can kind of envision the roller coaster as I'm building it. And life politically at that time was exactly that way, where like every day was a new, like, are we going to get a break here? It was like the Cylons attacking in Battlestar Galactica. You're like, just count down to 30. This is going to happen again and again and again. So trying to catch a breather and find those moments of levity and fun in that time was like sort of, Wanderers is a book that, despite as horrible as a lot of it is, I tried to make it funny and hopeful in the same measure. Like, Hitchhiker's Guide being one of the earliest books that I loved. I'm injecting, because it's an absurd, insane book that's sort of about some weirdly dark stuff, sort of corporate control and just eradicating a planet. And I'm like, I want to seize just a little bit of that, just a tiny bit of that spark, to put that in this work.
I love that. I mean, that's one of the things I really loved about Wanderers and Wayward, is that they are, and we talked a little bit about nuance in part 1, but they're such a nuanced exploration of all of these different concepts, fears, situations, humanity, the good, the bad, the beautiful, the terrible. But looking at back to the fears, we'll talk about AI. Black Swan is Blue Dot. But Black Swan is such a wonderfully complex character and element, particularly in Wayward. So I'm just kind of curious about your thoughts about actual AI. Like, we joked a little bit about ChatGPT, but what are your thoughts, hopes, fears about AI in the world right now?
Yeah, we do not even have enough time for me to get into that. I have very complicated thoughts. Like, I don't think AI is certainly non-useful. There's so many things that it can bring to the table, but it's also obviously a tool. And Black Swan is built off of this sort of in principle, especially in the first book, that it can really only do things with what already exists. Like, it can't, AI as it stands, and possibly ever, because I don't know if we ever really achieve true sentience and intelligence, it can't really create something new, because everything it makes is based off of us. But I also thought in the second book, that's a sort of a fascinating dichotomy, because as it gets closer and closer to us and it realizes all it has is us, like, does that start to make it mad? Does it start to make it crazy? Like, what, and even now, like, some of this stuff is happening in really fast forward. Just the leap in availability to the masses and the leap in its capability between the, a year ago, the art it would make would be these like blurry, horrible things with 1,000 fingers.
It was like now it was like Van Gogh, and now it's like
now it's photorealistic people with 1,000 fingers. But it's gonna figure those fingers out. Damn it!
One of these days,
it's gonna figure out the number of fingers.
When we figure out these fingers, it's over for you bitches, right?
I envision like a future story where it's like that's how you find out the AI creations, like how many, count your fingers, like
right.
After that point, they make you.
I'm reading a lot of Dr. Seuss to my son right now, just because it's like whimsical and crazy. And there's one where it's like this dude has 11 fingers, and he has like 5 in one hand, and then on the other hand he has 6. And I'm just like trying to explain to my son, like, it's only 5 on each hand. Like, don't get confused, man.
This is AI.
He's like, I'm missing one, Dad.
Sorry. The AI will find you. Report to the AI station for correction. It's weird. Like, I think the big sort of like ironic joke, in that it's not really even a joke, is like, right now AI is being used to recreate all of the things people want to do already, like art and stories, but like, can it like do my scheduling for me? Like, can it do the things I want to do? Like, I don't want to write an email. Can it handle that part? Like, why isn't it not handling the, like, where's my Roomba? I want my Roomba.
Yeah.
Like, why is it take up some of those
Can it not like subsume my job?
Right.
You know?
Right. Yeah, the things like the whole initial idea was like eventually AI will just do all the things so you can create art and write stories. But
It's
now
like
it's
it's
like
like
starting out doing that.
yeah, it's like
Right.
Ian M. Banks' culture series where it's like,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know, this post scarcity
That's
kind
right.
of society, but it's like, no, don't just don't throw them into the fucking creative waters because that's where we lurk.
That's where we are.
That's what,
Get out of there.
yeah, a little
Yeah.
like creative monsters just
Yeah.
lurking.
Set it on cancer. Can it cure cancer?
Exactly.
Like, let it do that
Exactly.
part. We haven't hit that one yet. So do
Give
that.
AI a shot.
Yeah, give AI the shot.
It's like they even had there was like a PlayStation game called like Folding at Home, and it was all about helping an algorithm to increase its knowledge of cancer cells spreading.
Oh, right.
And so it's like, why can't we just get AI to do that?
Yeah.
You know?
There
Yeah.
you go.
Find some fucking antifungals for us.
Yeah. Yeah. AI, get on that.
I love
Don't
it.
steal our jobs.
So steal our
I
jobs.
love it.
Yeah. But also like for you, you know, living through the end of the like the tail end of the Cold War and into what became somewhat of like a less apocalyptic global scenario.
Eh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now we're back to the fun times.
We're back.
Yeah, I was
We're
gonna
back,
say,
baby.
baby.
We've
We're
come full
back.
circle.
Your
Yeah.
nuclear fear is hot again.
It's hot again. But
Yeah.
it was like the big apocalypse for the 20th century. You know,
Yes.
it's like books like The Postman and movies like Escape from New York and all these different things. Was like nuclear warfare was just this ever present thing. And now with the war in Ukraine and with Vladimir Putin and Joe Biden kind of being like, we're going to just like talk shit to each other and nothing's going to get solved. And it's just
Yeah. But
ridiculous.
it's also weird how like there's certain things we don't take as seriously. Like it's happening, but like a lot of people are like, it's probably not real because like Putin knows that it's just kind of like he still wants his country. He wants the power. So is he really going to fire them? And it's almost like how the UFOs thing are like all these UFO reports and people are like, not now. Like, fine, whatever it is with the UFOs, we have a pandemic. I don't have time to think about UFOs. And they're like, well, it might be extraterrestrial. Like, not now.
Yeah.
Not
But then
now.
there are a
All
lot of
this
peo-
time, we've
there are a
been
lot of-
waiting for this.
There are so many
Right.
people who are like, yeah, I'm really into this. But they're like more into it than something like nuclear winter. And it's like,
Yes.
get your
Yeah,
fucking priorities straight. But do you think
exactly.
there's going to be a new resurgence of nuclear post-apocalyptic fiction? Or what do you think about
I
that?
don't know. That's a good question. Like reading this book, the last, having that as its focus surprised me. I was like, oh, that's a shocker. I didn't expect to see that in this day and age. But the whole there's an undercurrent to it, similar, I guess, to Wanderers, that it's like, well, did you vote for that guy? Like she never says Trump, but there's a lot of this like, did you vote for that guy? Because this is how we got here. And you're like, and other people are like, well, did we really? Because like he's just an idiot and he didn't do this. It was just whoever. Then that's like this weird undercurrent to the book is even before where we're at right now with Ukraine and the buildup of nuclear arsenal again. Like she was somewhere keyed into that. Like, hey, Trump let something out, or also like stopped paying attention to important things, and things kind of got away from us. It was sort of an interesting kind of connection there. So maybe we will start to see some of that. I don't know.
Yeah.
It depends if people want to read, or if publishers decide they want people to read about the horrible things going on.
True.
Right.
Maybe self-pub will take the helm.
It might be the start. Yeah.
Because it's like, yeah, you're right. Like this author kind of hit the nail on the head in terms of like all the machinations behind the scenes that sometimes we don't pay attention to, but it's like politics is exponential. And when it's something as simple as like seemingly simple as like a news story about, oh, Trump decided to back out of the Iran nuclear deal. It's like, okay, that's just one more step in the direction of like,
that's a big ripple.
Nuclear, like that's putting nuclear back in the consciousness of people in a very subtle way. But at the same time, it's like, that's just showing one politician's lack of forethought in terms of like, what the fuck could this cause down the line? You know?
Exactly. What are the ramifications and the ripple effects?
Yeah.
And writers, I think, are uniquely artists too. Any sort of storyteller or artist is sort of, obviously the thing. With talking about the prophetic nature of something like Wanderers, with science fiction, a lot of people always ask, like, oh, you're predicting the future, predicting the technology of the future. And I think really both horror writers and science fiction writers, and ultimately probably every writer, you're really speaking about the present. And so I think we're uniquely sort of in that sense that we're talking about in the last piece, plugged into, mycelial networks and stuff. Like, I think artists and stuff are plugged into kind of a deeper undercurrent of things that we don't consciously necessarily grab, but we live a lot in our own heads, and so certain things we're picking up weird, broken frequencies and transmissions from the reality in which we live, not even from the future.
It's like the detritus of the collective unconscious.
Yes. Yeah,
just kind of
Flotsam and Jetsam.
We're just feeding on it.
Yeah, like weird algae.
We're lurking, MJ. We're lurking in the waters.
I love
That's
it.
what we do.
I'm always lurking.
We're like little hippos. Just take a big bite here and there.
Yeah,
I would love to be a little hippo.
I'm down with that.
So to bring it back to specifically in mycelial thread, we're coming back anyway. I wanted to ask you more about mushrooms because I know Adrian wants to talk about mushrooms. Adrian always wants to talk about mushrooms. So I'm gonna set you up for some mushroom talk.
Mushroom chat.
You talked a little bit about your decision to choose a fungal-borne disease because you were kind of picking up on again that information that's existing in society now that like we might not have a great response to that. Was that the entire reason? Like what was do you also have a fascination with mushrooms like our friend Adrian?
A little bit, yeah. I mean they're obviously both from the hallucinogenic component to the consumption as food to just the weird beauty in your yard and what they do and the fruiting bodies, but how that's really only like the flower and there's so much going on beneath the surface. And then with how that ties into climate change and how, The Last of Us is playing with it now, but Wanderers played with it a little bit too. The idea that this is going to get weirder before it gets, stable, if it really gets stable. It's just, they're just a fascinating, because they're really poorly understood.
Yeah.
And I think it's only recently in the last like few decades, you're starting to see more and more attention being paid to like, hey, what is this? Like, what is this stuff? What is these funny things in my yard? Like, is this a thing we should be thinking about? And it's like, yeah, probably, in all of the ways possible. Even like, our dog is on a drug called Atopico, which is from a mycotoxin. It's specifically designed, by the fungus to combat an unholy host of intruders to itself. And so you distill that down to a drug and you give it to your dog so they stop licking their ass. So it's like, there's a weird chain of events that go from, one to the other, but A to Z is a janky journey. Yeah.
Yeah, but it's so cool because there's just a range of possibilities for what fungi can do. It's like, they can help your dog with an itchy butt. Or they can, there's a mycologist in Canada called Paul Stamets, and he does a lot about mycoremediation and mycelium as like building material. So there's like you can make bricks out of mycelium, or you can use mycoremediation to clean up oil spills. Like there's even a fungi in the Amazon that is basically has developed over however many centuries or whatever to literally consume and break down petroleum.
Yeah.
So,
I've heard about that.
Yeah.
So it's like they can
fascinating.
break down plastic and we can hopefully use it in the seas to break down these microplastics and have them be consumed by the fungi and take all that shit out of the water. It's like
fungus can save us if we let it. Yeah.
That's Paul Stamets kind of shtick is like mushrooms are gonna save the world. Yeah. But yeah, like you said, like the understanding of it is so new, and I don't think that there's not enough of like a public perception of what mushrooms can do. But I think there are some things that are kind of putting mushrooms into the public consciousness, whether it's like your book, or now I think like The Last of Us is very poignant. It's like The Last of Us is a huge thing. And even though it shows fungi as the cause for a zombie outbreak, I think it is still very interesting to have fungi out there and so widely consumed by people so that at the very least it's like, okay, we know it's not going to cause a zombie outbreak.
Right.
But what else can mushrooms
Do
do?
we know that though,
Do we know that?
Adrian? Do we know
Not
that?
not in humans. Cordyceps can affect certain bugs
Yeah,
and,
like
and
the
insects.
ants, right?
Yeah,
But I
yeah.
love that it seems like it self-regulates. It knows not to take all of them.
Mhm.
Like there's a balance to it that I really appreciate.
Yeah.
It's why I like the work of Jeff VanderMeer in terms of
Yep.
what he deals with fungus, is that even when he sort of gets into the horror of it, it's an alien horror, not a horror. Like I obviously love The Last of Us, but it's not doing a lot with fungus in terms of like how beautiful and weird it is.
Yes.
It mostly just kind of uses them as a zombie analog with a few
Mhm.
painted on kind of like details.
Mhm.
Visually, it's fantastic. But I could see, more like going deeper. And VanderMeer goes weird. He is all weird, and fungus is so weird. It's like a match made in heaven.
Yeah, it's like a new weird author talking about
Yes.
something weird. VanderMeer is one of my biggest influences, and
Yeah.
it's like the beauty of it in terms of there's like a sublime nature to fungi in terms of what we lack in understanding, but also in terms
Yes.
of like the inherent beauty that we can see in it.
Yes.
And then at the same time, there is horror there, but then humans have horror too. It's like,
Oh God, yeah.
yeah, we have probably more horror than anything that exists.
And
we
the
have a
horror
creative mind to
of
kind
mushrooms is like not horror to the mushrooms.
Exactly.
You know what I mean? It's like it's just horror because we don't get it and it's weird.
Yeah.
But yeah.
I'm just decomposing, man. That's all.
yeah, it doesn't want it. Yeah, I'm
I'm
just decomposing.
chilling.
I'm just talking to my mycelial friends and decomposing.
Yeah. I
And
love it.
there's another thing that I wanted to kind of pick your brain about, because in terms of the prophetic nature that MJ mentioned, but there's even this angle with the actual fungi itself in Wanderers and Wayward, in terms of like its origins in sort of things like gain of function research and bioterrorism, which is also very prophetic, because gain of function research became a very big thing during COVID, and bioterrorism is always an ever-present threat that people don't really think about that much.
Yeah.
So for you, how was it going down that research rabbit hole?
Oh, nightmare. I mean, like
I was going to say, how bad is your anxiety now?
yeah, I mean, that's where you start to be like, because like my initial impetus was like, well, I know, we are dealing with white nose with bats here, and I know there's certain ways that they've tried to get ahead of it, and not always successfully. And there's similar fungal things that go with snakes and frogs, and you start to be like, oh, there's like a frog apocalypse with certain kinds of fungal infections, and you're like, well, what happens to people if that's a thing with people? It's like it's not Last of Us zombie time. It's just like a pandemic. It's just a bad situation, and I didn't want it to become like the type of thing where, whether in The Last of Us or the Crazies or whatever, where people become just automatically violent and go nuts. Like I thought there was something about like, well, as it gets into your brain, you just kind of start to lose yourself a little bit to it. And it was sad and poignant of people just not having it together anymore. It was terrifying. It's like, it's one of the journeys like, no, that could happen. And like having spoken to, someone like Maren McKenna, who is obviously a great reporter on both the CDC and issues with health and microbial existence. She's like, oh yeah, no, that's one of our blind spots is fungus. Like, it's just really one of those things we don't, as we get sort of super fungal infections happening, and you just don't know, and we have low levels of antifungal, and they're rough, generally speaking. So it's going to, if that ever were to take the leap, it's going to be a bad situation. So I was like, I'm going to write about that. It's time to write about it. Let's get ahead of that and figure it out.
MJ, you look terrified.
Gosh. I know. Well, that's the thing, because like I'm like a little bit of a hypochondriac, but it's fascinating too, right? Where it's like it's scary. But okay, so like let's bring it back to some happiness for a little bit here, because apocalypse fiction, it's notoriously bleak, right?
Yeah,
but like. Adrian and I were talking, and I know we mentioned it a little bit earlier too, but we found both Wanderers and Wayward to be ultimately hopeful. Like there's an undercurrent, there's chords of hope ringing throughout the whole story. And I'm assuming that was very intentional. I really enjoyed how we talked a little bit a minute ago about, humans have, the evil and awful in them. But there were so many parts in Wanderers and Wayward where we see the beautiful in humans, or just, when society collapses, not everyone is immediately gonna, grab their, machine guns and go Mad Max, right? We're gonna
Well, that's
have
exactly it. Most don't.
right.
Historically, like Lord of the Flies is not how that actually turned out when that actually happened. It's
Yeah.
not.
Yeah.
It makes good fiction, but usually that good fiction ends up being a warning more than a reality. And I didn't want society to turn into The Road, or even Last of Us. As much I really, really like The Last of Us, but I find its view of what people became to be really, really nihilistic. Like we suddenly became just a fascist nightmare state. I'm not suggesting it would be peaches and cream, but communities do come together in hard times, and it has some of that too. Last of Us is starting to kind of get into that a little more, which I do like. But I really wanted to sort of have that, like Rebecca Solnit, sort of like Paradise Built in Hell. Like community is the thing that kind of saves us. And we talked a little bit about it in the earlier early talk about, community saves writers. And I think that's just sort of true in everything, is having community is one of those things that is vital. And it was vital at the pandemic, and it's vital as a writer, and it's vital, as things hit chaos points along our civilization journey.
I love that.
And ultimately that is channeled through your representation of characters and we brought up, that Apocalypse tends to focus on the darker sides of human behavior. And you mentioned The Road, and it's like that's one of the clear examples in my head of like post-apocalyptic fiction that is very powerful, but at the same time it is very nihilistic.
Yes, it can be. Zombie fiction too.
Exactly. One of my favorite post-apocalypses is The Matrix, and there throughout that entire trilogy, even though like the last movie is pretty whatever and the second movie is okay, there's still a lot of there, like MJ said, it's like there's a lot of hope there. And I think hope is that kind of thing that when it comes through character, it really helps to let readers understand human nature a little bit better when not everyone just resorts to animal behavior and decides to fucking decapitate each other and just become like bandits and all that kind of thing. But I think you balanced your characters with really complex, nuanced behavior and something that MJ brought up earlier in terms of people doing beautiful things, even though it might not be intentional, or even though it might not be a massive thing, but something beautiful that shows you humans can be positive and humans can come together in the face of all this horrific.
Well, that's the whole Station 11 thing, right?
Exactly.
Like survival is not enough. It's about art and theater and radio. Exactly. I mean, it's like trying to rebuild, not just like I need food, but like there's a reason I want to stay in the world, and it's all of these things that people make, and it's the community that we find.
Exactly.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And for you, when you were writing Wanderers and Wayward, how did you approach the character portrayals? And at the same time, what advice would you give for authors who are writing in this apocalypse genre in creating believable characters that don't necessarily tread that more tropey line that a lot of apocalypse fiction does?
Yeah, like I try to. I mean, I don't worry about crossing over into tropes, but certainly don't try to aim for them. With Wanderers specifically, I mean, and it leads into Wayward because it's largely the same characters. I approached it like strategically. Like I knew it's one of the times where I had the world and the idea and the situation first. I was like, well, I know that I want to view this story and this world from a variety of angles. I don't want it to just be a Michael Crichton, well, here's the scientist who knows stuff. And I don't want it to just be the Stephen King, well, here's the small town character who is just trying to survive. Yeah. Like I want all of that. I kind of want to get into all of the possible angles, and that's sort of the absurdity of the Douglas Adams type of character. Like Pete Corley is both a little bit of a Stephen King character and a Douglas Adams character. I mean, and ultimately, hopefully, like a character of mine too. Like he feels like a very, very me character. So for me, I sort of designed them as these like kind of additional viewpoints and these additional pathways into a narrative that allowed me to, of course, then it becomes interesting drama as these characters who from different backgrounds and different understandings and POVs, who they come together and they sometimes work together and sometimes don't easily work together. And how do they deal with each other as this entire situation is unfolding? So it was for me very much an issue of strategy more than anything else, and then building those characters out of that and making real people in them, and not worrying so much about the like hitting the beats. Like I don't want to just hit the beats. Like I find that it's one of the reasons why not outlining, I think, worked for me in this case, because I let the characters, I always say that plot is Soylent Green. It's made out of people. Like characters are saying things and doing things, and that's what makes plot. Maybe ideally the things they do make sense in pursuit of their goals and trying to overcome their problems. But as they try to do those things, they're making plot as they go. And that's cool to me. And it means you don't have to worry so much about the like save the cat style things or the sort of traditional genre beats. Not that you don't want to hit those. Some of those things feel good and satisfying when readers are hitting them, because it's sending a signal to certain readers like this is the kind of story I'm reading. Right. But then it's also cool to subvert them or simply not worry about them and just see where the story goes.
Yeah. And Pete Corley is one of my favorite characters as well. Because it's like,
thank you. Yeah.
I just had in my head, I was like, kind of a mix of, what's his name? Keith Richards meets like Steven Tyler's personality.
Yes, or Steven
Taylor.
That's the vibe.
Right. Yeah, that's the vibe.
Like, brilliant. Yeah. But I love that. Yeah. It's like, for anyone out there, I don't think this applies to just post-apocalyptic fiction. I think this applies to fiction in general, is like, let your characters breathe and grow naturally and let them speak the story that works best for them at that particular moment. And it's like, MJ and I both plot a lot, and you have plotted in the past, but for Wanderers, it's just like that project spoke to you in a certain way and said, let this happen naturally. Right. Like, don't overthink this. And it turned out for the best,
Yeah, that's the dream. That's when it's working on all cylinders.
Yeah.
I love that. So to close out this really awesome discussion, it's been so much fun. Thank you for coming on. I am just so curious about, we've talked a lot about the elements of Wanderers and Wayward that we wouldn't want to be real. Like Black Swan and White Mask and all that stuff.
Yeah. Except community and hope.
Yeah, that's what I want to say.
We just have the community without all that stuff.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Let's just skip the pandemic part.
All the bullshit.
What's the favorite element of the world that you imagined in Wanderers and Wayward? If you can tell us without spoilers, like if you had to pick a favorite element, and why is it Gumball? No, I'm just kidding.
It's definitely Gumball.
I fucking love
the great
Gumball.
Thing is Gumball exists now. Gumball is in all of our pets, all of our good dogs.
Yes.
Yeah. He's a very good boy. Yeah, that's a good question. Like I think it's the sort of weird communal nature of the flock. Like the idea that there's these people undergoing a thing, and there's a lot of people who think they're scary and terrifying, but then the shepherds are the people who are like, it's that very, and I know it's a little trite, but like that whole like Mr. Rogers look for the helpers kind of a thing. Like, well, here's your helpers in the book. They're the people who are kind of the going because either they have family or because they feel like, I don't know what this is, but I need to be a part of this and help this out.
The Oompa Loompas.
And I find that fascinating. Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah, that was one of my favorite aspects too. It's kind of like the intimate nature of the flock, but then the broader misperceptions of what it meant.
Yes.
What caused it. That was one of the coolest dynamics. To be like, see it very up close and personal. Yeah. But then to see it like on the news, or like the pastor character who was like podcasting about it. Yeah. I love that you threw podcasts in there as well. Cause
and tweets.
Yeah,
Twitter's in there.
Too. I know. I love that. I love that.
Yeah.
Yeah. That was very cool. But like that dichotomy was very interesting, because that's what happens a lot.
Well, that's part of why it felt so like you're a mind reader, because that we saw so many of those same dynamics.
Yeah.
With the pandemic,
where it was just so many different perceptions. So yeah, it was
really
weird. Really fantastic.
That happens.
You were talking about misinformation and disinformation before it got hot.
Before it was cool.
Right? Before it was cool.
Alternative facts, people.
I know. It was all me. Should have listened to me.
That's it for this mini masterclass and our two-parter with Chuck. But thank you again so much for taking the time to enlighten everyone about post-apocalyptic fiction, about your work in general.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me. This has been cool.
Absolute pleasure. And if you could let everyone know again where they can find you on social media.
Yeah. Again, if Twitter hasn't completely broken down, at Chuck Wendig there, and honestly most social media sites. But you can find me at the ever reliable blog, which is still the worst word in the human language. Blog.
Yeah.
Terribleminds.com is where I tend to live and breathe.
Awesome. And I will link to that in the description and everything like that. But you can also follow SFF Addicts on Instagram or Twitter at sffaddictspod. And you can follow me at Adrian M. Gibson. MJ, where can people find you?
Yep, you can find me across all the main socials, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, at MJ Kuhn Books.
Perfect. Now, keep reading, keep imagining, and we'll see you next time on SFF Addicts.